the mystery theory. Today, we're gonna start a series that I'm gonna call October Monsters. I've shared throughout the years different themed cases around Halloween that either happen on Halloween or around the time, but I have some very in-depth cases I'd like to share with you. So I put them together, and today we're gonna start with monster number 1. But before I start with today's case, I'm gonna ask you to please, before you fall asleep or get busy doing house chores, or however you listen to these cases, that you take a few seconds, say hello in the comments, share your opinions on the case, or simply leave an emoji to show support. If you're new and you'd like to listen to this series, please also hit the red subscribe button, and that way you can come back every time there's a new video. There is also a bell you can hit by the subscribe button. That will send you a notification when there's a new video. And trust me, for this month you want to be notified because videos will be more frequent. Now that we got that out of the way, let's get started with today's case. Robert Mark Edwards. He was born in the year 1961. But under some hard circumstances, because his father didn't believe that he, Robert, was his child. Because of his frustration, he would beat him daily, and he actually started when Robert was only 6 months old. Robert's dad was a violent man, so he would also beat Robert's sister, mother, and brother. He would call Robert and his brother William SFB1 and SFB2. That meant shit for brains 1 and 2. Robert's father was a bartender, and Robert's mother was a nurse. Both of them, unfortunately, were alcoholics, and by the time he was 11, Robert was 11, his mother developed a drug problem. She, like other cases we've covered of nurses or medical personnel, it's just has more easier access to pills. She developed an addiction to Valium. What I didn't mention is that this family lived in Florida. But after that, they moved to Puerto Rico for a short period of time. It took his mom, Robert's mom, 2 years after she developed that addiction to leave Robert's father. But they finally divorced when Robert was 13 years old. By then, Robert's mom decided to move to California. Her life was really not great. She was doing drugs, and she was also drinking. And eventually, shortly after they moved to California, she was run over by a car. She survived, but eventually her behavior and addiction started to look normal to her kids, who eventually started to pick up these habits. Robert and his brother William, who were beaten and abused verbally by their own father, were scarred by their childhood. But at this point, they were acting up even though they didn't plan on it. They began to break into homes and steal stuff to buy their own drugs and alcohol. drank a lot. They smoked pot and hashish, which I'm not sure what it is, but I'm sure somebody will tell me in the comments because I forgot to look it up. They took LSD, cocaine, methamphetamines, heroin, anything else they could get their hands on. Their sister Elena developed an addiction to Valium right around the time. This was such a tragic family dynamic. I mean, both of Robert's grandmothers were addicts. To one of them, lorazepam, which, don't quote me, but I think it's some kind of a sleeping pill. Could be something different, but the other one, the other grandmother, was addicted to Valium and Oxy products. Keeping all that in mind, Robert eventually dropped out of school in the 8th grade, and soon after he started selling fake LSD to kids in the area of Long Beach. They would sell, so it was Robert and William, that's they, would sell little tabs of paper with the signs on it, claiming it was LSD, but it was nothing more than printed paper. As time passed by, Robert's alcohol abuse was so bad that he experienced his first blackout at the early age of 16. Alcohol was only a small part of his problems. The drugs transformed him into those people that just roam the streets aimlessly. Because of this blackouts, sometimes he would wake up and not know where he was or how he got there. As an example, one time he woke up under a kitchen table in a random house without remembering how he got there. By March the year 1986, Robert met Catherine Diebel. He was still doing his fake LSD business near Long Beach, and he had an accident, crashed his motorcycle some months earlier, and his leg was in a cast. So now he was standing near a bus stop, and Catherine drove by in her pickup truck. She looked at Robert, felt sorry for him, and offered him a ride. Eventually, they were a couple. Catherine introduced him to her mother, Marjorie Diebel. Marjorie was 55 years old. She was very stubborn, very secure of herself. She was a successful real estate agent. So she was very opinionated. She lived nearby in Los Alamitos, California, which is a bit inland from Long Beach. One afternoon, while Marjorie was at work, Catherine took Robert to her mother's apartment. Robert noted where Catherine got the hidden key from, but then they moved inside and had sex. At this point, he had been dating for 2 months. And eventually, Catherine and her mother decided to travel to Palm Springs. This was in early May. Robert helped them load their bags into the car, and Catherine was nice enough to let Robert use her truck while they were away. As sometimes happens, the truck started having problems as Robert was borrowing it. Marjorie was blaming Robert for not taking care of the truck. She was upset and demanded that he fix the truck before they came back. So Robert took the truck to the dealer, but he was very upset at Marjorie because she really said it in a very harsh way. Eventually, Catherine and Marjorie returned from their trip on Monday, May 12th. Catherine was driving and dropped her mother off at her apartment and headed home. The next morning, May 13th, Catherine noticed something interesting. She would typically park her truck in the driveway with her driver's side door either before or after the juniper bushes. She did this so she wouldn't hit some bushes. She had the juniper bushes with the door. But that morning, it was parked with the door directly against the bushes. So she would have to kind of go into the bushes to try to open the door to get in. But Catherine knew that the only other person who had access to the truck was Robert. She thought it was strange that he borrowed the truck in the middle of the night, but she didn't get too upset or worried about it. 3 days later, the real estate agency where Marjorie worked started to get worried. Marjorie had won Salesperson of the Year in 1985, and she hadn't been to the office in days to claim this prize. That was something she was looking forward to, and this was completely out of character. So eventually, a coworker called Los Alamitos police. On May 16th, in the afternoon, police checked on Marjorie by visiting her apartment, but her front door was open. From the door, you can hear loud music playing. Police knocked and called her name, but nothing. When they entered her bedroom, they found Marjorie dead. She was face down on the floor, naked from the waist down. Her hands were tied behind her back with a piece of her nightgown and a telephone cord. This other belt was tightened around her neck, and at the end of that belt was tied to the handle of the dresser. So her neck was suspended 8 inches above the floor. The legs showed sign that at some point she was tied. It was gruesome. The bedroom was completely covered with blood. Drawers open, jewelry missing, her clothes all over the place. And the telephone had been ripped from the wall. Also, there was a bloody pillowcase used as a hood over her head. She had lost a lot of blood from ears and mouth and her nose. It also, she had some adhesive residue, which kind of indicated that she was gagged, beaten, raped, and strangled. Apparently, this monster sexually assaulted her with a styling mousse hair product. Robert was with Catherine when the police called her. He went with her and waited outside. Of course, Catherine was crying, not only for losing her mother, but the brutality of the murder. Catherine, her grief really was too much for Robert, who stayed with her for a few more weeks, but eventually they drifted away and stopped talking. But police considered him a person of interest. They politely asked for a DNA sample, but he refused. 7 years went by, but nothing that would help find Marjorie's killer. However, the police kept track of Robert, every move he made, although they had nothing on him. But if they were right, he would eventually slip up. So, during the following years, he couldn't seem to stay out of trouble, was arrested for burglary, and for weapons charges, stolen property. And then in the year 1992, he moved to Hawaii. And he kept digging his own grave and was arrested in the year 1994 for kidnapping, sexual assault, robbery, and burglary. Now fast forward to 1996. It was during the summer when Robert was working as a roofer in South Maui, Kihei. I'm probably mispronouncing that. It's a town in the south of Maui. Now, Robert lived just a block from the beach with his new girlfriend, Janice Hunt. Janice also had a daughter, and three of them lived together. Janice's daughter was 12 years old. But from the window on their apartment on Canoe Street, Janice loved to sit and watch the whales. So he'd usually have binoculars that she kept on a table below the window. But Robert was using those same binoculars to watch the neighbors. One of them was Peggy Ventura, who was from Alaska and typically spent a few months every year in South Maui with her mom, who at the time was 67 years old, and her name was Muriel. And Muriel was a successful real estate agent. Now, they rented a condo about half a mile from the beach, while Muriel rented the ground floor on apartment on Canoe Street, just 1 block from the beach. And this place was directly across the street from Robert Edwards. On January 25th, 1993, Peggy went out with her mom and later on dropped her off at the apartment she had across the street from Robert's. Now Robert just was informed that his dog had been hit by a car. He was sobbing and had the dog in his arms, but it was too late. Also, a month earlier, he was told that his stepfather was killed in a plane crash. So the loss of his stepdad and now his beloved pet really threw him through a dark path, and he returned to excessive alcohol and cocaine consumption. The sudden death really was what was the hardest to accept. So back to that night when Muriel was dropped off, Robert carried his dog's body, I should say, to his kayak and paddled out into the ocean to quote unquote bury him at sea. He came back at 11 p.m., went to a friend's house, had some cocaine, had some alcohol, and blacked out. The next morning, Janice could hear people outside. The police were around or surrounding the Kenu apartments across the street. So she goes outside and asks a neighbor, who tells her somebody's been murdered. It all started when at 7:30 that morning, Peggy went to her mother's apartment to go pick her up to go to the beach. They would have a morning walk, and her mom wouldn't miss it. When she started knocking and not get any answer, she started to worry. She also notices some flip-flops she didn't recognize as her mom's outside the front door. So she looked for a hidden key under a rock, entered the apartment, and found blood on the floor. Her mom's bedroom door was locked, and as she was crying, trying to find the phone, she notices that the phone had been ripped from the wall. So desperate, she runs outside to a neighbor's apartment. She screamed for them to call the police. And tried to get in through a window to her mom's bedroom. She crawled through the window and found a comforter that was covering the window, which made the whole room very dark. She opened one window and to kind of see, and she notices the room was a mess. There was more blood on the floor and on the walls. Beneath a pile of blankets on the bed was her mother's body. She was face up, naked, lifeless, bruised. She was beaten so viciously that it was one of the worst things you can imagine to see when you find somebody you love in that situation. Police arrived and they found evidence that she was bound at one time. But whatever it was used to tie her, it was taken by the killer. Her wedding ring was missing, and other items were also missing. Whoever assaulted her used objects to assault her. And it was, I just can't even explain the details of how brutal the sexual assault was. Apparently, so much so that the object protruded into her abdominal cavity. Her breasts were cut. Her pubic hair had been cut or shaved. But this time, the killer left plenty of evidence. There was a bloody palm print, a white t-shirt with a bloody foot impression, cigarette butts, and he also spit on somewhere in the bathtub. There was also evidence that the killer most likely came in through the window. On the windowsills and the floor near the window were pieces of dry grass. In a dumpster nearby, they found a bloody pillowcase, and it was Muriel's. Inside the pillowcase, her checkbook, traveler's check, pieces of telephone cord, which later on it was noted that that's what the killer used to bind her wrists and ankles. They found a bra with the tips of the cup cut out, pair of panties cut, several other stuff taken from her apartment. So police interview the neighbors, including Janice. She tells police that when she told her partner, Robert, about this, he was genuinely surprised. She also claimed, however, that while they were dating, Robert and her would tie each other, mostly her. And she even said that he tried to sodomize her with a bottle once. Detectives look through her apartment and they find binoculars she used, but also notice that it had a clear view into the victim's apartment. It wasn't hard, really, to tie Robert to the crime. The bloody palm print was a match for his palm. The spit contained his DNA. So looking into his record, that it was about 10 pages long, he also noticed that he'd been wanted in California for the past 18 months for parole violation. At this point, Los Alamitos detectives, they heard this horrendous story. They knew that now they could link him to the murder of Marjorie Dubel as well. As you can probably imagine, Robert blamed his behavior on alcoholic blackouts. He said, quote, "It's hard for me to understand that I could do something so horrible." Blackouts are not an excuse, really, for a horrible murder. So the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to 5 life terms plus 20 years. Eventually transferred to California, where if convicted, faced a possible death sentence for the murder of Marjorie Dubel. It'd be easy to assume that it was the same killer. Both victims were near the same age, both real estate agents, lived alone in a ground floor apartment. They were bound with telephone cords, strangled, violated. And they even shared initials, M.E.D. In California, Robert didn't deny that he killed Marjorie, but he claimed he had no memory of it. again was found guilty of first-degree murder. But the jury was deadlocked during sentencing. His lawyers argued that drugs and alcohol were the causes, that he was abused by his father, and that pushed him to the extreme. But the torture and mutilation that these victims endured really didn't make a difference. The excuses that the lawyers gave. So on September 9th, 1998, Robert Edwards, was sentenced to death. He had spent more than 20 years on death row, but then was spending some time in San Quentin prison, just north of San Francisco. Now, I guess, fun fact is that this monster writes poetry and stories, and there's even a short story included in this book that I read the story in, and I honestly am a person who believes in second and third chances, but under these circumstances, I really am not interested in what he has to say as far as poetry or short stories. Not because I believe he'll die a monster or really, but because of the brutality of what he did, not once but twice that we know, it really, in my mind, without trying, it kind of dehumanizes the person and turns them into a different category. And this, to me, in my book, based on the evidence, based on this investigation, and absolute proof that he committed it, turns him into one of the worst monsters that any of these people would have run into, could have run into. There are these cases like this that always leave me with this empty feeling. And this kind of a depressing thought that today could be a kid growing up somewhere who has the potential to turn into this kind of monster. I am not one to share this kind of cases that are so brutal, but I think by not sharing them, I'm not making them go away. This still happened. The victims were affected. the system is dealing with this kind of monster more often than not. So I think it's time to shed some light on some of the worst kind of monsters. The ones that are in the flesh. The ones that share a lot in common with you and me. And that is their physical appearance. They're humans. They're not out of this world. They're not animals. They're not Bigfoot. They're not aliens. They're not Michael Myers or Jason. These ones are real life monsters. So this is the first episode for October's monsters. If you think that this is too much for you, I completely understand. Sometimes it's hard for me to process it, to read through this, and to skip the most basic details, to spare that image in your head. I get when there are crimes committed by this monster, this kind of monster. Thank you for being here today. As always, there's nothing to enjoy about this video, but I hope that it brings some kind of awareness. And join me as we meet our second monster of the month in my next video. Thanks for watching.